Thank you all so much for this opportunity. Thanks to the organizers of the Global Standards Leadership Conference and the sponsors, LexisNexis and IPlytics, and thanks, Tim, for your comments. I've really enjoyed the panels today. I do believe that the conversations that we're having about the role of standards and the future of intellectual property commerce is absolutely central to global competitiveness, to drive the deployment of critical technologies. And it really serves as the infrastructure of innovation. Standards open up that door to SMEs, to bringing technologies to market in a trusted way. Sure, there are challenges with the markets and the business models associated with standards essential patents. The opportunity that we have before us, though, is one of a global series of markets that need to be interconnected, and we're at a time of dramatic new investment in science and technology and in standards themselves. Together with my colleague Andre Iancu, who had been the head of the Patent and Trademark Office, and we continue to work together on issues related to intellectual property and standards and competitiveness. We liken the current time to the wake-up call that came during the space race. The beginning of that was called the Sputnik moment. That was an awakening of the United States to invest more strategically in science and technology, in innovation, and ultimately the underpinning of intellectual property to be driven into commerce. I'm pleased that we are seeing an awakening in the United States and so many other parts of the world of the importance of standards to global trade. And we face certain risks. And I think the panel just before, talking about proposed regulation by the European Commission, the way in which it's being deployed has some really wonderful motivations. We heard that from the panel, but we also see certain unintended consequences that can affect the markets not only in Europe, which is the stated intention, but also has global consequences. I'm pleased that a process that began while I was the director of NIST has finally come to fruition. The US administration has recently announced a national standard strategy for critical and emerging technology in the United States. It's an important step forward, and it's an important synthesis. We are at a time where the rules of engagement with regard to intellectual property commerce are in a turmoil. We can look at data around litigation in intellectual property disputes and in standard essential patent litigation issues. And I think that the debates that are going on in the conference here today are very important to shed light on the kinds of policy decisions, the kind of business strategy decisions that companies need to be considering in this complex world. We know that emerging technologies will not have successful market adoption without trusted standards and processes for monetizing intellectual property that is directly relevant to standards deployment. We see these in emerging sectors such as quantum computing and networking. Certainly the debates around artificial intelligence and the need not only for standards, but the requests that are coming out from various quarters in industry around the world for regulation are an important indicator to us that we need to have fundamental principles that underpin the standardization process for artificial intelligence, colleagues at NIST and elsewhere, OECD, are working on a common lexicon to support the development of an understandable series of deployments around standardization. I think that it's a really important time also to recognize the role that is played by standards in global competition. We've certainly seen evidence of some of these challenges with actions that China has taken with regard to anti-suit injunctions and follow-on actions that are in many cases alarming around the world. And so bringing this community together on a global basis, and I'm pleased that the name of the conference is still Global Standards Leadership Conference, because these are markets that require a much more unified approach and the ability to have global interoperability to gain also opportunities for global return on investment. And interoperability obviously links with greater opportunities for safety and security in the deployed marketplace. The United States has, in many cases, been challenged as we see the race to invest, the race to invent, and the race to actually have products delivered into global marketplaces. And so I think that at this time we've seen a shift in the US, much more embracing the importance of research and development as the beginning of the standards process and the opportunity to create a common understanding based on research collaborations. A lot of this happens, of course, in open settings, and there are many important movements around the globe for open science and for transparency in information sharing with regard to the research enterprise. And I think that brings with it the opportunity for greater understanding globally and the chance to actually work, especially for critical and emerging technologies, to harmonize the standardization process in the future. China has, of course, dramatically recognized the importance of standards and has stepped up their game, and I think that it is a signal to all the rest of the world to step up and to ensure that not only do we have seats at the table for standards negotiation and close engagement with standards development organizations, but also to have a well-educated standards workforce. Traditionally, what's happened, of course, in many of our corporations is that education happens through on-the-job training, and that, of course, will not change in the future, but I think we've seen a very strategic approach around the world now to increase standards literacy so that we have people much better prepared for the workforce and all aspects of technology, the business and the legal dimensions of the standards landscape coming down. The opportunity also in the United States for new incentives for academic participation in the standards process has at long last been recognized. The most recent standards policy in the US calls for science and technology funding organizations to ensure that they allocate funding for the academic community that's engaged in the standards process to be able to use certain proceeds of federal grant funds to participate actively in providing the benefit of their knowledge and their research at the standards negotiation tables. It's a global challenge that we face. I think every country, of course, wants their own economies to grow and to succeed. But on the other hand, I think we have an opportunity to continue to maintain that dialogue about the importance of the global process, the opportunity to have a rules-based system that is respected globally, And even though we will continue to have debates on an ongoing basis about fairness in pricing, return on investment from investment in intellectual property protections for standards essential patents, it's absolutely essential that we work together to include all in the global standards process. I believe there have been mistakes made in the past that have in particular affected the role of China at the standards tables globally. And I'm pleased to see that that has been in the process of correction now. So this risk of being in a bifurcated world or having more localized standards processes in place only creates challenges with regard to harmonization around the world and ultimately creates a much lower incentive, much lower return on investment for efforts to provide products on a global basis. Surely there are local deployments of products that have intellectual property protections and that are also part of regional standards. But clearly, it's so important for us to work with all parties, all nations globally, to ensure that we have full engagement in the standards process, that we don't encourage decoupling of nations and their companies from the global standards efforts. And so I think that the kinds of debates that have been going on today in this important forum, the thoughts that you're bringing about fairness and what should be resolved through processes of litigation, what should be addressed through pooling and other types of strategies, and the role of regulatory regimes and price control regimes needs to be carefully considered with all parties at the table. This is really, I believe, not only a challenging time, but it's also a wonderful time as we look to the future. There's a lot of the technologies that are on the horizon are not yet associated with standards. And so as we look at photonics communications and quantum computing and interoperability, as we look at where artificial intelligence is going and some of the guidance that's come from standards bodies, from NIST and from others, it's an important time for the standards community to recognize that we need together to solve these problems collaboratively, and that by creating barriers to global participation, that individual companies, individual nations, and ultimately the world will lose. And so let me just say thank you for the opportunity to join with you today. I know that you've got another awesome panel that's coming up, including one of my close friends and colleagues, Gordon Gillerman from NIST, who's been involved very much, I know, in this U.S. Standards policy with these encouragements for global engagement for aspects of investment in science and technology, encouragement to industry to participate in the standards process, and for small and medium-sized enterprises to ensure that they have a place at the table while we also look to the future of workforce. So let me just stop there with my thanks to you and to the organizers of the group. I know you're a little bit over schedule, so thank you so much, Tim and the organizers.
Thank you, Walter.